noticed Daniel right when he entered a room, not because he was invisible, but because he was quiet in a world that rewarded noise. At 32, Daniel's life looked painfully average from the outside. He lived alone in a narrow apartment on the edge of a fatting American town called Mason Ridge, a place where dreams usually arrived young and left early. His apartment had thin walls, a flickering kitchen light, and a heater that made more noise than warmth. Still, it was all he could afford on his warehouse salary. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., Daniel woke up before the alarm. Not because he was disciplined, but because anxiety didn't let him sleep peacefully anymore. Bills, time, regret, they lined up in his mind like unpaid debts. Daniel worked at Northway Logistics, lifting boxes, scanning labels, and following instructions from supervisors younger than him. He wasn't lazy. In fact, he worked harder than most. But hard work without direction has a cruel way of feeling pointless. His coworkers joked loudly during breaks. They talked about sports, gossip, and shortcuts. Daniel mostly stayed silent, sipping cheap coffee, listening more than speaking. When he did talk, his voice carried honesty, but honesty rarely impressed anyone there. "Why don't you just relax?" One coworker once said. "Life's not that serious." Daniel wanted to laugh, but instead he nodded, because for him, life was serious. Years ago, Daniel had dreams, real ones. He wanted to build something meaningful, something that would let him look in the mirror without disappointment. But life didn't collapse suddenly. It eroded slowly. A missed opportunity here, a fear-based decision there. And suddenly, 10 years were gone. One rainy evening, after a double shift, Daniel walked home instead of taking the bus. The cold soaked through his jacket, but he didn't mind. Walking helped him think. That night, he passed a small thrift store he had never entered before. The lights were still on, and a handwritten sign on the door read, "Closing soon, everything must go." Something made him step inside. The store smelled like old paper and dust. Shelves were half empty. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with deep wrinkles and calm eyes. He looked up and smiled. "Take your time," the man said gently. "Things have a way of finding their right owner." Daniel wandered until he reached a shelf of worn books. One thin notebook caught his eye. The cover was blank, no No title, no author. Curious, Daniel opened it. Inside, the first page held a single handwritten sentence. Most people lose their lives not by failing, but by never choosing. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He bought the notebook for $1. That night, sitting on his bed, Daniel read every page. It wasn't a normal book. It was a collection of thoughts about patience, integrity, delayed rewards, and quiet discipline. Some pages were unfinished. Some were just questions. One page stopped him completely. If no one believed in you, would you still do the right thing? Daniel closed the notebook and stared at the wall. For the first time in years, he felt exposed, not judged, but understood. That night, he made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a public one, a private one. He would stop blaming time, luck, and people. He would live deliberately, even if no one noticed. The next morning, Daniel started small. He woke up earlier not to hustle, but to learn. He wrote daily goals in the notebook, not about money, but about growth. He reduced distractions. He listened more. He spoke less. At work, nothing changed externally. Same job, same pay, same tired faces. But internally, something shifted. Daniel stopped waiting for validation. Weeks turned into months. Most people would have quit by then because there was no visible reward. But Daniel had learned something powerful from the notebook. Results lag behind discipline. Then came the test. One afternoon, Daniel discovered a serious inventory error, something that could cost the company thousands. Fixing it quietly would protect his supervisor, who often took credit for others' work. Reporting it would expose the truth and likely make Daniel unpopular. He stood there, holding the report. Fear whispered, "Stay quiet. Don't create trouble." But another voice, stronger now, answered, "If you sacrifice your values for comfort, you'll always live uncomfortably." Daniel submitted the report. The fallout was immediate. His supervisor was furious. Coworkers avoided him. Rumors spread. Daniel went home that night feeling heavy, but strangely calm. For the first time, he had chosen truth over approval. He didn't know it yet, but that choice would change the direction of his entire life. Because integrity has a strange habit. It stays silent at first, then it speaks loudly later. And Daniel's story was only beginning. After Daniel submitted the report, the warehouse didn't feel the same anymore. The air was heavier. Conversations stopped when he walked into the break room. People who once nodded politely now avoided eye contact. It wasn't anger exactly, it was discomfort. Truth has that effect on people who survive by convenience. His supervisor, Mark Holloway, didn't speak to him for 2 days. On the 3rd day, Mark finally called him into the glass-walled office overlooking the warehouse floor. "You trying to be a hero?" Mark asked, arms crossed. Daniel stood calmly. "I was trying to be honest." Mark laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honesty doesn't pay bills, Daniel. Loyalty does." Daniel didn't argue. He had learned that explaining values to someone who doesn't have them is like explaining color to someone who refuses to open their eyes. "You can go," Mark said coldly. From that day on, Daniel's schedule changed. Worse shifts, more physical tasks, fewer breaks, nothing officially punishable, but enough to make a point. At home, things weren't easier. Daniel's savings were thin. His phone buzzed with overdue reminders. Some nights, he stared at his notebook, wondering if he had misunderstood its message. Was integrity supposed to feel this lonely? He skipped dinners out, not that anyone invited him anymore. He stopped scrolling social media because watching other people celebrate made his silence louder. One night, rain tapping against the window, Daniel finally wrote something honest in the notebook. "I'm afraid I did the right thing too early." But beneath that line, he wrote another. "Still, I would rather suffer honestly than succeed pretending." That sentence became his anchor. Weeks passed. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. The plant manager, Elaine Foster, called Daniel into her office. Elaine wasn't loud like Mark. She spoke slowly, deliberately. Her desk was clean, her eyes sharp. "I reviewed the inventory issue you reported," she said. "You could have ignored it." "Yes, ma'am." "Why didn't you?" Daniel paused. This time, he didn't answer automatically. "Because if I trained myself to stay silent about small wrongs," he said carefully, "I wouldn't recognize big ones when they mattered." Elaine leaned back. "You know," she said, "most people here care more about looking capable than being trustworthy." She slid a folder across the desk. "I need someone to help audit our internal processes quietly. No shortcuts, no politics. Interested?" Daniel nodded, surprised but composed. "Yes, That evening, Daniel walked home with a strange feeling in his chest, not excitement, not relief, something steadier. Validation didn't come when he demanded it. It came when he stopped needing it. The auditing work wasn't glamorous. Long hours, endless spreadsheets, but Daniel thrived in it. He found errors others missed, not because he was smarter, but because he cared. Still, the change didn't make him popular. Mark resented him more. Coworkers whispered louder. And then life tested him again. Daniel's mother called one night. Her voice was tired, too tired. "Danny," she said softly, "I didn't want to worry you." She was behind on medical bills. Insurance didn't cover everything. She tried to sound strong, but Daniel heard the truth between her words. After the call, Daniel sat in the dark. All his discipline, all his honesty, and still not enough money. For the first time in months, temptation crept back in. Mark's voice echoed in his memory. Loyalty pays. Daniel knew what Mark meant. There were ways, small manipulations, ignored numbers, silent approvals that could bring bonuses, promotions, comfort. No one would know. The notebook lay open on the bed. Daniel turned to a blank page and wrote one question. What kind of man do I become if I solve today's problem by creating tomorrow's regret? He closed the notebook. The next day, Daniel took a second job, night security, at a quiet office building. The hours were brutal. Sleep became a luxury, but he didn't complain. Pain with purpose felt different than pain without meaning. Months passed like this. Then came the mistake. Exhausted, running on little sleep, Daniel overlooked a small detail in a report. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was enough. Mark noticed, and this time, Mark didn't stay quiet. The accusation spread quickly. Daniel was called in again, this time not with opportunity, but suspicion. "You talk about honesty," Mark said, smirking. "Looks like you're human after all." Elaine reviewed the case carefully. Daniel accepted responsibility without excuses. "I failed," he said, "and I'll fix it." Elaine watched him for a long moment. Most people defended themselves. Daniel didn't. That mattered. The mistake cost Daniel the auditing role. He was sent back to the floor. Worse shifts again. Side glances, silent judgment. That night, Daniel finally broke. He sat on the edge of his bed, notebook in his hands, and whispered, "I'm doing everything right. Why is nothing working?" No answer came, but on the last page of the notebook, one sentence stared back at him, something he hadn't noticed before. Growth often feels like punishment before it feels like progress. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time since this journey began, he cried not from weakness, but from exhaustion. Yet even then, something inside him refused to quit, because deep down, Daniel had learned a truth most people never accept. Doing the right thing doesn't guarantee immediate rewards. It guarantees that when the reward comes, it won't destroy you. And soon, very soon, life was about to test whether that belief was real. The demotion didn't hurt Daniel the most. What hurt was the silence that followed it. No explanation was offered to the warehouse floor. No clarification was made. People filled the gap with their own stories, and most of them weren't kind. Guess he wasn't so perfect after all. Knew he was pretending. People like him always fall. Daniel heard the whispers, but he didn't respond. He had learned that defending your reputation in front of people who enjoy misunderstanding you is a losing game. Still, the weight of it pressed on him daily. His schedule became unbearable. Early mornings at the warehouse, long nights at the security job. Sleep came in fragments. His body grew tired, but his mind stayed awake, wrestling with questions he had no answers for. Then the call came. It was from the hospital. His mother had collapsed at work. Daniel arrived breathless, heart pounding, hands shaking. The doctor explained the condition carefully, professionally, but Daniel only heard fragments. Stress, untreated, needs rest, expenses. When he saw his mother lying there, pale but smiling weakly, something inside him cracked. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to be a burden." Daniel held her hand tightly. "You're not," he said, though fear screamed otherwise. That night, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed not for success, not for money, but for strength. The bills piled up quickly. Insurance covered some things, not enough. Daniel sold his old laptop, then his TV, then the guitar he hadn't played in years, but never planned to part with. Still, it wasn't enough. Mark noticed Daniel's desperation. Opportunity has a way of showing up disguised as compromise. Mark cornered Daniel one evening near the loading dock. "You look exhausted," Mark said casually. "You know, I could help you out." Daniel didn't respond. Overtime approvals, performance bonuses. All I need is cooperation. Daniel understood immediately. A few signatures ignored, a few numbers softened, nothing dramatic. Mark leaned closer. "No one gets hurt, and your mother gets help." For a moment, a dangerous, honest moment, Daniel considered it. Not because he was weak, but because he was human. That night, Daniel sat alone, staring at the notebook. Every word he had written, every promise to himself, every quiet sacrifice. He imagined his mother healthy. He imagined relief. Then he imagined waking up years later, successful, comfortable, but unable to respect the man in the mirror. He closed the notebook and stood up. The next morning, Daniel refused Mark's offer. Mark didn't explode. He smiled, and that's when Daniel knew he had made an enemy. 2 weeks later, Daniel was fired. Official reason: repeated performance concerns. Unofficial reason: integrity is inconvenient when it doesn't stay quiet. Daniel packed his locker in silence. No one stopped him. No one defended him. When he stepped outside, box in hand, the sky was gray, matching his future. Unemployed, exhausted, responsible for hospital bills. That night, Daniel sat in his dark apartment, surrounded by things he might soon lose. For the first time, the notebook felt heavy, not inspiring. What was the point? He asked the empty room. Days passed. Daniel applied everywhere. Rejections came faster than hope. Interviews ended politely. Promises were vague. Savings disappeared. One evening, eviction notice in hand, Daniel reached a place he had feared but never admitted. Rock bottom. He returned to the thrift store where he'd found the notebook. It was closed. A handwritten sign hung on the door. "Thank you for everything." Daniel stood there a long time. Then he did something unexpected. He sat on the curb and started writing not goals, not lessons, but truth. Every fear, every regret, every moment he wanted to quit. By the time the sun set, something had shifted. Daniel realized something powerful. Nothing had been wasted. The pain had shaped him. The discipline had prepared him. He just didn't know for what yet. That night, Daniel received an email from Elaine Foster. She had left Northway Logistics. She was starting something new. And she remembered him. Daniel reread the email 3 times, not because it was long, but because it felt unreal. From Elaine Foster. Subject: Are you still willing to build things the right way? His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled. Elaine wrote plainly, without drama. She had resigned from Northway Logistics after months of internal conflict. She was forming a small consulting firm focused on ethical operations, process transparency, and long-term efficiency, work that most companies claimed to value but rarely practiced. I don't need someone impressive, she wrote. I need someone honest under pressure. I saw that in you. Daniel leaned back in his chair. For months, he had felt unseen, like his choices were disappearing into a void. And now, suddenly, someone had been watching all along. They met 2 days later at a quiet cafe. Elaine looked different outside the corporate world, more relaxed, more human. I won't lie, she said after they sat down. I can't offer stability yet, or high pay. Daniel smiled faintly. I'm used to uncertainty. Elaine studied him. You don't need to be. She explained the plan. Small contracts, long hours, high resistance. Many companies didn't want real change. They wanted the appearance of it. Daniel listened carefully. What made you leave? He asked. Elaine paused. Because I realized something too late. Protecting a system that punishes integrity makes you part of the punishment. Daniel nodded. He understood that sentence in his bones. He accepted immediately. The early days were brutal. They worked out of a rented office with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that barely functioned. Clients were skeptical. Some meetings ended in polite rejection. Others ended in frustration. One executive laughed outright. You expect us to slow down profits to fix invisible problems. He scoffed. Elaine smiled calmly. I expect invisible problems to become very visible if you ignore them. Daniel watched quietly. He didn't speak much in meetings, but when he did, people listened not because he was loud, but because his words were precise, grounded, real. At night, Daniel still worked security shifts. Bills didn't disappear overnight. His mother's recovery was slow but steady. He visited her often, never complaining. One night, as Daniel walked home under dim streetlights, he realized something startling. He was tired, but not empty. There is a difference between exhaustion that drains you and exhaustion that sharpens you. Then came the first real break. A mid-sized manufacturing company agreed to a trial audit. Nothing fancy, but they listened. Daniel found inefficiencies that saved the company thousands without layoffs, without shortcuts, just clarity. The CEO called Elaine personally. "I don't know how," he said, "but your guy sees things others miss." Elaine smiled after hanging up. "Congratulations," she told Daniel. "You just made us credible." Work increased, slowly, steadily. Daniel stopped needing the night job. For the first time in years, he slept a full night without anxiety clawing at his chest. One afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected message from Mark Holloway. The message was short. "Can we talk?" Daniel stared at the screen. Old anger surfaced, but so did something else. Perspective. They met at the same cafe where Daniel had once sat alone, feeling invisible. Mark looked smaller now, less confident. "I heard you're doing well," Mark said. Daniel nodded politely. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "I may need your help." Daniel waited. "Our department under investigation," Mark continued. "Things from years back, inventory, compliance." Daniel understood immediately. Mark swallowed. "I didn't handle things right." It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was something. Daniel took a breath. "I can't help you hide anything," he said calmly. "But I can help you tell the truth." Mark looked away. That was the last time Daniel saw him. Later, Daniel realized something important. Success didn't require revenge. It required closure. Months passed. Elaine's firm grew not explosively, but cleanly. Each client came through trust, not marketing tricks. Daniel was offered a partnership. He hesitated, not because he felt unworthy, but because he understood responsibility now. That night, he opened the notebook, the same one that had started everything. The last page was still blank. He wrote, "I used to think success was being seen. Now I know it's being solid." He closed the notebook gently. Daniel Wright was no longer invisible, but more importantly, he was unshakable. And the final lesson of his journey was still ahead. Success did not arrive in Daniel Wright's life with fireworks. There were no sudden headlines, no viral moments, no dramatic announcement that the world had changed. Instead, it arrived the way most real things do, slowly, quietly, and honestly. The consulting firm grew, not because it chased growth, but because it refused to betray its principles. Elaine and Daniel turned down contracts that required shortcuts. They lost money doing so, but every no strengthened the foundation of their yes. Daniel learned something few people ever do. Compromise brings speed. Integrity brings distance. And distance mattered. One autumn morning, Daniel stood in their modest office, watching sunlight fall across the desk where he once worked alone late into the night. The walls now held framed certificates, but he barely noticed them. What mattered more were the handwritten thank you notes from clients who had avoided disaster by choosing transparency over greed. His mother was recovering well now, stronger, smiling more. One afternoon, she visited the office and looked around quietly. "You seem lighter," she said. Daniel smiled. "I stopped carrying things that weren't mine to carry." She nodded, understanding more than she said. That evening, Daniel returned to his old apartment one last time. He had delayed this moment, not out of fear, but respect. That place held the man he used to be. Before leaving, he sat on the floor and opened the notebook. The pages were worn now, creased, alive. He reread the first sentence he had ever seen. Most people lose their lives not by failing, but by never choosing. Daniel realized how close he had come to being one of them. He packed the notebook carefully. Months later, Daniel was invited to speak at a small leadership workshop. Nothing prestigious. No spotlight. Just a room of young professionals looking for direction. He stood at the front, hands relaxed, voice calm. "I won't teach you how to get rich," he said. "I'll tell you how to become someone who can handle success when it comes." The room fell silent. He told them about loneliness, about being misunderstood, about choosing truth when it costs you. Doing the right thing doesn't protect you from pain, Daniel said, but it protects you from becoming someone you don't respect. One student raised a hand. Was it worth it? All the struggle? Daniel paused. "Yes," he said simply, "because I sleep without negotiating with my conscience." Years later, Daniel's firm became a model not for its profits, but for its culture. Employees weren't pressured to lie. Mistakes were addressed, not hidden. People stayed, not because they were trapped, but because they were trusted. One afternoon, Elaine approached Daniel with a smile. "You know," she said, "people think leadership is about control." Daniel nodded. "But it's really about example." That night, Daniel walked past the same thrift store location from years ago. A new business occupied the space now. He stood there for a moment, remembering the man he had been tired, invisible, unsure. He realized something profound. Nothing in his life had changed by accident. Every quiet decision had built the man standing there now. He went home, sat at his desk, and opened the notebook one final time. On the last page, he wrote, "The world rewards noise quickly, but it rewards truth forever." Daniel closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of growth. Because the real victory was never money, or recognition, or status. It was this: he had lived honestly when it was hardest to do so, and that made all the difference. Final moral of the story: success built on shortcuts collapses under pressure. Success built on character endures. If you choose integrity when no one is watching, life eventually places you where everyone can see, not to praise you, but to trust you, and that trust is the rarest form of wealth.